Hello and welcome to Constructive Wine Online, Wine 101, 5-class course. This is class 2 on grape varieties, and we've previously seen wine appreciation, wine tasting, as well as viticulture and vinification, so how wines are grown and made in the winery. And for today's class, will be all on grape varieties. So by the end of today's class, you'll know how to define what a grape variety is. Have you ever wondered what a grape variety is? You'll be able to list characteristics of the key 8 white and red grape varieties, as well as name other white and other red grape varieties. There we go. So, what is the progeny of Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc? And how do you pronounce this grape variety here on the screen? And are you curious to know which grape variety naturally tastes like chocolate? We'll take a look at all of that in today's class. Should last about 50 minutes, aiming for 50 minutes on today's class 2 Wine 101. So what is a grape variety? You can think of it like a dog breed analogy. So they all come from a common ancestor, and they're all the same species. In this case, Vitis vinifera is the wine grape species that produces Chardonnay, as well as Pinot Grigio, Nebbiolo, Grenache, Merlot. And they all express a little bit differently, so they'll have a little bit different appearance. In the case of grape varieties, they'll taste a little bit different aromas, different flavors, different structure, and they're grown in different parts, wine growing parts throughout the world. And we'll take a look at all of that today. It's also known as a vine variety or a cultivar. So a little bit of interesting trivia for you there. So here are the 4 principal white grape varieties we'll look at in order: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, and Pinot Grigio, also known as Pinot Gris, same grape variety. And after these 4 white grape varieties, we'll take a look at 4 principal red grape varieties: Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Syrah Shiraz. All right, so starting off with Chardonnay. This is the world's most planted white wine grape variety. It was number 2 behind a vastly planted Spanish, fairly obscure white grape called Ayren. But in the late 20-teens or early 2020s, Chardonnay overtook Ayren and became the most planted white wine grape variety. I believe it's number 3 in the world, behind Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. It expresses terroir extremely well, so if it's grown in northern Bourgogne like Chablis, or Niagara Peninsula, or in Western Australia in Margaret River, it expresses the terroir very differently, very succinctly, and very interestingly, perhaps beautifully. It's also very adaptable to winemaking, so the winemaker's hand, whether it's oak aging or batonnage, some of these techniques that we'll cover a little bit in today's class, as well as last lesson's class. It's an excellent choice for pairing with fuller fare food, fuller fare, or fuller dishes. Somebody that likes a red wine might also like Chardonnay, because it tends to be fuller, especially if it's perhaps oak aged or lees stirring, malolactic fermentation. These can give it a more favorable with full dishes, and for those who prefer typically a red wine. So here are some of the characteristics of Chardonnay. It depends, as mentioned, a lot on the climate and on the terroir. In a cool climate, a less warm climate, it might be less ripe, and it'll have lemon, green apple, perhaps yellow apple, peach, pear characteristics. In a moderate climate, in a riper climate, warmer climate, Chardonnay will express that peach as well, maybe mango, melon, and banana and pineapple characteristics as well. Should the winemaker choose to oak age and oak ferment, barrel ferment the Chardonnay, It adds body as well as flavors of vanilla straight from the oak staves, as we saw last class, and toast from the oak barrel, which has been cooked, literally toasted, and baking spices as well, such as clove, nutmeg, allspice, and really delicious sweet spice flavors. If the malolactic fermentation is a conversion of, it's not an actual fermentation, but it takes place after the alcoholic fermentation, and the malolactic converts malic acid, think of a green apple, into lactic acid. So lactic acid bacteria converts malic acid into lactic acid, and lactic acid is like a milk acid, so it can add butterscotch or sour cream, butter characteristics, and it's also softer acidity than malic acid. If you picture, sour cream versus or butter versus a green apple. So here are some of the regions that Chardonnay thrives in. Again, it's the most planted white grape variety in the world. So does exceptionally well in Canada, Nova Scotia, as well as Ontario, Prince Edward County, Niagara Peninsula. British Columbia is phenomenal Chardonnay, cool and moderate climate Chardonnay. California, that big rich style, but can be also restrained from some of the coastal regions like Santa Lucia Highlands, Sonoma Coast, quite unctuous in that ripe pineapple and banana in Napa Valley. And in inland California, in the Central Valley of California, tends to be very high yields, and this is some of the more cost-effective or lower priced Chardonnay comes from that inland Central Valley in California. Chile, also an excellent producer of Chardonnay, and South Africa, such as in Walker Bay, really world-class Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Australia, as mentioned in Margaret River in Western Australia, but other parts like Yarra Valley, as well as Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, in the state of Victoria, producing really excellent cool climate Chardonnay. And I would say also Tasmania as well, especially for sparkling Chardonnay and sparkling Pinot Noir blends. New Zealand in the North Island in Gisborne, as well as Marlborough in the south, and other parts of New Zealand, cool climate or moderate and cool climate Chardonnay to good effect. And Chablis in the north of Bourgogne. See if I've got my laser pointer here. So there's, I'm not sure if this is transferring onto the recording, but there's, so if you can see this, there is Chablis there in northern Bourgogne, just south of Paris. And to its northeast, at the very top diagram there of grapes, is Champagne, which is 30% planted to Chardonnay. So large, it's a very large planted wine growing region. So a large amount of Chardonnay in Champagne, which also produces the Blanc de Blanc. So white champagne from white grape has to be Chardonnay. A little bit further southeast in Bourgogne, kind of inland Bourgogne, along the north of Lyon, south of Dijon, you have the Côte d'Or, so the east-facing golden slopes that face east, and especially Meursault, and in the south, Puligny-Montrachet and Chassagne-Montrachet, but some other really excellent villages for very high-quality, food-friendly Chardonnay. Okay, so there's Puligny-Montrachet there, kind of our benchmark Chardonnay, which is oak aged, judicious oak aging for just means appropriate amount of use of oak, not too much oak, but balanced with the fruit, and also undergoes the malolactic conversion in this wine region, Puligny-Montrachet, which is appended. The village of Puligny has appended the famous vineyard Montrachet. The mountain of Mount Ratchet has appended that vineyard Montrachet to the village name Puligny. So they call the whole village Puligny-Montrachet. Chablis as well, Premier Cru and Grand Cru. We'll take a look at this next class in class 3, Wine 101. And this is the classification of better quality vineyards in Chablis in northern Bourgogne, close to the Yonne, or close to getting towards Paris in northern France. Moving on to second grape variety, Sauvignon Blanc. This is often has an herbaceous character, kind of a green bell pepper, fresh cut grass, canned peas. It can have a really green kind of herbaceous characteristic to it. Generally best consumed current vintage within a year or two, but some do oak age in Bordeaux, for example, Pauillac, in Pessac Léognan. They oak age Sauvignon Blanc, and this can be a really attractive age-worthy style for 2 to maybe 10 years, 2 to 5 years. But most is crisp, refreshing, and best consumed within a year or two to preserve those fresh fruit flavors. So what are those flavors? There's the herbaceous, so kind of fresh cut grass or canned pea, asparagus, green bell pepper, often a lemony and gooseberry. Have you ever tried a gooseberry? It's a very tart, little fruit, and similar to lemon, quite fresh and high acid. It can have a peach characteristic in a warmer climate, and passion fruit, mango, and papaya if it's ripened, over-ripened in the harvest season towards September and October in the northern hemisphere. And do you remember from last class in the southern hemisphere? Or do you otherwise know? So in New Zealand, for example, they'll harvest their late harvested Sauvignon Blanc in sometimes April, but certainly late March, early April. Here are some areas that grow classic Sauvignon Blanc. So California, where some of it is labeled Puy Fumé, or Fumé Blanc, and that's a play on Puy Fumé, which we'll take a look at in France. Chile as well, some great Sauvignon Blanc. South Africa, excellent value Sauvignon Blanc. And Marlborough, that classic style with the fresh cut grass, papaya, mango, passion fruit, peach, gooseberry, lemon, really quite complex Sauvignon Blancs. We'll take a look at an excellent producer on the next slide. In France, I'm not sure if the pointer is working. I'll give it a try. In France, we have Sancerre and Puy Fumé. These are in the Loire Valley in the center vineyards of the long winding Loire. We'll look at that region in Old World wines next class. And Bordeaux as well is about 90% red wines, and the rest is about equally split Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. So 2 white grape varieties, and produces fairly light, fresh Sauvignon Blanc. But also, as I mentioned, from Pessac Léognan, some very well-aged, ripe, oak-aged, mature Sauvignon Blanc. Okay, a couple of benchmark styles. Sancerre is the classic. It tends to be more restrained, highly mineral, very high acidity, more of the gooseberry, lemon, minerality, kind of wet pebbles or crushed rocks, that wet minerality. From New Zealand, great producer here, the black label Sauvignon Blanc, Babiche, and this is one of the top Sauvignon Blancs I've had. There's half a dozen that are that I've tasted that are quite a bit better than the others, although fairly inexpensive, approachable style, or good quality at a range of price points. Moving on to Riesling, the sommelier's darling. This is a high acid, fresh, light alcohol wine. They can be as low as 7 or 8% from the Mosel, which we'll see in Germany. The Mosel as well as Rheingau and Alsace in France, just over the German border, and the Rhine in northeastern France, producing some great Riesling. It can be bone dry, such as almost all, to my knowledge, in Alsace, or medium sweet, or medium dry, as well as lusciously sweet, such as in a Canadian ice wine, Ontario ice wine from Riesling, or New York State ice wine. Some of the German dried grape and ice wine dessert styles can be very sweet and delicious as well. Great food partner and absolutely delicious. What does it taste like? What can it taste like? Often lemon, lime. Lime is a classic characteristic of Eden Valley and Clare Valley in Australia, South Australia. We'll look at that on the next slide. So if you get lime, that can be an indicator. Green apple, canned pear, especially if it's a little bit off dry or medium dry, sweet. Minerality, that's the image of crushed rocks there. And yes, petrol. Your Riesling can and does smell like petrol, especially if it's aged over 2 years, 2 or more years. It can take on an evolution of this petrol. There's no need to worry. Of course, there's no petrol being used in the wine, just like there's no lemons being used in the wine. There's no butter in a Chardonnay. These are natural, God-given flavors in the grapes that are unlocked during fermentation with yeast and through the aging process. So you get a very attractive kerosene or petrol characteristic. It can be kind of unusual for the first time you smell it, but with proper guidance, it can really taste very delicious and be quite attractive on the nose. Okay, so a few regions that highlight Riesling classic styles are Washington State, as mentioned, Ontario and Finger Lakes in upstate New York, the Clare Valley and Eden Valley in South Australia. And in Europe, I'd already mentioned Alsace in northeastern France, the Mosel, a famous river flowing through western Germany, southwestern Germany, and the Rheingau along the Rhine. It's on the north-south facing slopes. We're going to look at some of these regions next class 3. And Austria as well, producing really great Gruner Veltliner. Is that a new one for you? Gruner Veltliner, and really great Riesling as well. Okay, so famous German Riesling from the Rheingau is it's either Rheingau or Mosel. I think it's the Rheingau, but Bernkastel or Doctor. So from Bernkastel, maybe in the Mosel. Bernkastel Doctor was the wine that was used to cure there's an ailing king in the Middle Ages. And from the Bernkastel vineyard, they were able to cure the king, and so it's called the Bernkasteller Doctor. For dessert wine, I would include Tawse, T-A-W-S-E. It's an Ontario, Niagara Peninsula Riesling ice wine. Very age-worthy, very complex, and very sweet, about 20% residual sugar. So 200 grams per liter, give or take. Of course, you're not drinking a liter of ice wine. 60 milliliter serving would be great. So about as much as an apple in a standard serving of this delicious ice wine. Riesling ice wine. Moving on to Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. It's the same grape. So if somebody asks for a Pinot Gris or a Pinot Grigio, it's the same grape. They're different stylistically and tends to be... well, we'll look at the characteristics on the next slide, but they tend to have grapey floral characteristics and tends to be a bit riper and oilier if it's Pinot Gris from Alsace, for example, and tends to be a bit lighter, fresher, and higher acid, and a bit more neutral if it's Pinot Grigio from northern Italy. And depending on where it's grown in the world, which style the winemaker is trying to emulate, they don't have to, but they can name it after the style that it most represents. So that kind of more oily, viscous Pinot Gris, or the more neutral, kind of friendly, Pinot Grigio. I've heard it called. So can be quite a nice style, quite light. But in any event, both mutated from Pinot Noir. So Pinot Noir eventually mutated into Pinot Meunier, a clone, another separate grape variety in Champagne. and those are both black or red grape varieties, and they mutated into Pinot Gris, which is it's actually a pink-skinned grape variety. So a little bit of color. So if you look at a Pinot Grigio from Ontario, for example, can have a little bit of kind of pink or orange color to it in the bottle. And then there's Pinot Blanc as well as the white grape variety. So there's Pinot Gris, has a melon characteristic. It's a bit oilier, a bit more viscous and fuller bodied. Great with food. Can be a little bit spicy almost. Almost like a ginger and white pepper. Pinot Grigio has a lemon, fresh, neutral style. So very high acidity and kind of higher yields. So it can have a little bit less flavor, more almost neutral taste to it. I find the Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio from Pacific Northwest, so British Columbia, especially Oregon, as well as Washington State, to be very good. Some of the best I've tasted. New Zealand producing from Nelson and Marlborough, some other Pinot Gris. Alsace produces that Pinot Gris style. Gris being gray in French, so gray Pinot in Alsace. Across the border in Germany, they call it Grauburgunder, so gray Burgundy, Grauburgunder, Pinot Gris. And in Italy, this is the Pinot Grigio, gray Pinot as well, and very high yields and kind of more refreshing, crisp, neutral style. So a few classic producers, and Friuli being one of the more interesting, as well as Trentino Alto Adige, both in northern Italy, into the foothills of the Alps, producing a little bit more interesting Pinot Gris. Okay, so we'll move on to red wine grape varieties. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Syrah Shiraz. I hope you're still with me. I hope you're enjoying this and sticking along, following along. Can take a break now if you like. We're about halfway through, and we'll carry on in just a minute. Okay, so carrying on with Cabernet Sauvignon, and then Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Syrah Shiraz, and then we'll take a look at the alternate varieties, the other varieties, and wrap up Class 2 for Constructive Wine Online Wine 101. So Cabernet Sauvignon is the world's most planted grape variety, number 1, and it produces age-worthy wines that tend to be medium fuller bodied in a warm climate, as well as higher acidity, medium plus, and higher tannins, such as medium or medium plus. This makes it very age-worthy, and some of the longest-lived Claret from Bordeaux, Left Bank Bordeaux is some of the most expensive wines in the world. Next to maybe Pinot would be, if there's one that was the most, but this is, Cabernet Sauvignon wines are probably the second most expensive shelf ticket. They need a moderate climate at least, or a warm climate. It's a late ripening grape variety, so Cabernet Sauvignon wines don't really ripen well in a cool climate. The yields are low, the alcohol tends to be too low, and the acidity very high, and you also get a very green note. So just like we saw in Sauvignon Blanc, there's a very pyrazine is the technical term, but it's basically tastes like green bell pepper and or fresh cut grass. It can be really high if it's unripe Cabernet Sauvignon. So moderate or warm climate, but given the right warming temperatures and a moderate or warm climate, it can produce a fairly Cabernet wine at all price points. And this is maybe where it's different and maybe better, but certainly different than Pinot Noir, in that generally speaking, we'll see on the next slide, that next grape variety, that Pinot Noir is very particular, whereas Cabernet for very high yields in Central Valley Chile, Central Valley California, parts of South Africa, parts of Australia, inland parts of Australia, at very low prices, $10, $12, $15 here in the Ontario Canadian market. It can still taste pretty Cabernet-like, so it can be a good value for sure. And what does it taste like? It's classically black currant, so I highly recommend you go out and try black currants, and try all these fruits. The more you taste cherries, and for white wines, lemons and peaches and apples, and just actually taste them. You can build the ability to detect these characteristics in your wines. So Cabernet Sauvignon does taste like black currant, as well as cedar. Don't recommend tasting cedar chips, but certainly the smell of cedar you can imagine in a good Cabernet Sauvignon. And dark cherries. With oak, it softens the wine. Those thick tannins tend to mellow out over oxidative aging in an oak barrel over time, and it also adds flavors of vanilla, coffee, and toast. With age, the Cabernet Sauvignon wines will also soften, aging in the bottle. They'll soften over time. Those tannins polymerize. They link up and drop out, so there'll be a little bit of a sediment in an aged Cabernet Sauvignon wine, and that's natural. And it makes the wine a lot smoother and gives flavors of tobacco, cigar box, and sandalwood. Really delicious, hedonistic, pleasant flavors. Have you ever heard of sandalwood or tried a wine with sandalwood? I'd be curious to know. You can type that in the comments. So some regions for Cabernet Sauvignon, of course, Napa Valley, being its many of the top writers, Jancis Robinson, they say that Napa Valley is the second home to Cabernet Sauvignon, so very high quality, the first home being Bordeaux. Sonoma Valley, such as Knights Valley and Alexander Valley, producing really delicious Cabernet Sauvignon, Anderson Valley. Washington State, producing good value Cabernet Sauvignon, so you can find often for fairly well-ripened, high-quality Cabernet Sauvignon for usually a better price than perhaps in California. Chile, of course, Carmenere, Carmenere, Merlot, and Cabernet Sauvignon are widely planted throughout all of Chile. So there can be some good values, especially as you go up into both sides of the mountains on both sides of the country. We'll look at New World wines in Class 4. Western Australia, so Margaret River, producing great Cabernet Sauvignon. And Coonawarra, the other really classic red earth, that ferrous oxide red earth Coonawarra soils, producing really great Cabernet Sauvignon. Its home is Bordeaux, in particular Left Bank Bordeaux, and it's the second most planted variety in Bordeaux. But on the left bank in the Grave, so on both in Haute-Médoc and south of Bordeaux city in the Grave, in these gravelly soils, in the best soils, it produces very high quality, low yields, flavorful, ripe, small berries, and so very rich Cabernet Sauvignon wines. We'll take a look at Bordeaux next week, as well as Super Tuscans. I'll just leave you hanging with, do you know what Super Tuscans are? We'll cover those in Class 3. But they do involve Cabernet Sauvignon in the blend. It's a blended Italian wine. Here's a couple of classic Cabernet Sauvignon wines. Where in the case of the first growth Bordeaux, it is blended. Usually the ideal mix is 80% Cabernet Sauvignon and 10 to 20% Merlot, and 1 to 5% Cabernet Franc and other blending Bordeaux grape varieties. And in the New World, again, Napa Valley, Stag's Leap winning the Judgment of Paris in 1979 with Steven Spurrier. This was a competition that put California wines and consequently New World wines on the wine market and kind of in the awareness of French critics as well as world consumers. So Merlot is the world's second most planted grape variety. Tends to be a little bit softer than Cabernet Sauvignon and very smooth. And I would agree that this Merlot here I have today is a decoy Merlot from California. And yeah, I'd say it's got maybe a bit of chocolate aroma. We'll take a look at the aromas on the next slide, but certainly like a mocha, coffee mocha, and it is very, very smooth. Very good. So somebody that likes a soft wine. I mean, this is 14.1%, so there is some heat to it, but it's very smooth. It's very well integrated. There's very little harsh burn. Very unctuous and kind of ripe, fresh fruit from this Merlot, decoy Merlot. Very good. Merlot blends with Cabernet in the winery in that it has that softness, that body to Cabernet's kind of more austere structure, and the flavors meld really nicely, and they go well together in the vineyard as well, in that if your Merlot ripens earlier, and so you can harvest it up to 2 weeks before the Cabernet Sauvignon, where in Bordeaux, if the weather turns, being on the west coast of France, with the Atlantic, it can get the harvest can change quickly within a week or two. So it's almost an insurance that you would have some Merlot harvested before these storms blew in and potentially wrecked Cabernet or not Merlot at least. Okay, so what are the characteristics? On this wine, it's a little bit atypical, I think. I get more red cherry. So for me, Merlot tends to be dark cherry, chocolate, fruitcake. I do get quite a bit of fruitcake. So kind of that sweet spice and, a bit of fruit, cherries and raisins. And again, that mocha and perhaps vanilla, but certainly mocha and maybe coffee on this decoy. So are you sipping a wine at home? Which one? Would you like to type in be curious to know what you've got in your glass? If you want to type in the comments. So Merlot is grown in California, as witnessed here, both in Central Valley as well as Napa, producing some fantastic Merlot, and Sonoma County as well. Washington State, likewise to the Cabernet Sauvignon, some very good value with a little bit more of that. I'd expect more of that red cherry from Washington State, along with black cherry, which I'm getting both in this California. Chile, as mentioned, Hawke's Bay. So Hawke's Bay is in the North Island of New Zealand, and producing some interesting Merlot, Bordeaux blends, as well as Syrah. Some riper red wines from New Zealand. In Bordeaux, Merlot is the most planted grape variety, especially on the right bank. So we'll cover this next week, but as you're going down the two rivers that join the Gironde, on the left side is the left bank. We saw Cabernet Sauvignon dominates, and on the right side, if you're paddling your canoe down the Gironde, on the right side would be the Merlot dominant, such as Pomerol, as well as Saint-Emilion. And in northern Italy, similar to the Pinot Grigio, grown right around where the grapes clusters are there. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but in northern Italy, where this Merlot is grown, is very high yields, and it's the Po Valley, the Po River, and it's very alluvial soils and very high yields, so it produces thinner but less expensive, fairly decent quality for the price, Merlot wines. There's Pomerol there. This is Petrus, Chateau Petrus, one of the most famous and most expensive and revered wines in the world, and it's Merlot. From Napa Valley, there's Duckhorn. So that would be a Napa Same producer as what I've got, but one tier up. Okay, moving on to the Heartbreak Grape, Pinot Noir. It's got very thin skins, so it's susceptible to rot as well as breaking of the skins if it rains. And a lot of the climates where it's grown, it rains during the harvest season, and so it's very susceptible both in the vineyard, very difficult to grow, which is why it's the Heartbreak Grape, and it's also very difficult to vinify. Almost takes an element of I don't know, je ne sais quoi to some luck to vinify it and make it in the winery. But the best of the best are ethereal, complex, sensual, very delicious Pinot Noirs from especially the Côte d'Or in Bourgogne, in the Côte de Nuit. But some really other interesting pockets and producers who were inspired to try and produce this Heartbreak Grape Pinot Noir. Only really does, in my opinion, cool in moderate climates. Even in a moderate climate, it can be stretched too far and the acidity goes down a lot, and it can be really jammy and just too flabby almost. In a hot climate, even more so. But in a cool climate or a marginal climate, or I would say a moderate climate as well, you can produce some really interesting kind of on the cusp, kind of that walking that fine line between not having a crop and having a really fantastic crop of Pinot Noir and bottle of Pinot Noir wine. Because of its thin skins, it's got very pale color in the glass when you're tasting the wine, and light tannins. So both color and tannins, that kind of mouth drying, like black steeped tea. Those tannins, mouth drying tannins, are very light in Pinot Noir. There's not a lot of them because of the exist in the skins, and the skins, as mentioned, are thin. And because it's grown in a cooler, moderate climate, it tends to be light to medium bodied. Okay, so what are the characteristics? In a cool climate, I've split it into cool and moderate climate. So cool climate, we looked last class in Wine 101, class 1, on regions like Ontario, certainly British Columbia, Germany, producing cool climate, south of England, and these tend to be tart cherry with an earthy and mushroom aroma. So really interesting, kind of funky, cool stuff. In a moderate climate, say Oregon, Marlborough in the north part of the South Island in New Zealand, is a moderate climate, and that gives you more of a strawberry jam, more of a jammy red cherry than tart cherry. And you still can get the earthy, kind of barnyard, and caramelization. It can taste very caramelized or sweet as it's oak aged and oxidizes over time. So Canada, one of my favorite regions. Oregon, maybe the best New World, certainly one of the classic and top New World wine regions for Pinot Noir. Also home to the IPNC, International Pinot Noir Celebration. California, blessed with its climate, producing high quality Pinot Noirs, especially on Sonoma Coast, where it's moderated by the cool Pacific. Chile, same thing, and moderated by the cool Pacific. And some of the best value, to my taste and opinion, I would say the best quality to price ratio for Pinot Noir often come from Chile. New Zealand, some interesting pockets of interesting regions that produce Pinot Noir wines in New Zealand. Marlborough is the largest producer of Pinot Noir for New Zealand, and just across the bay in Martinborough, some really garagiste or kind of interesting lifestyle winery Pinot Noirs. And certainly Central Otago in the far south of the South Island at about 45 degrees latitude, producing on par with the best of the best from the New World for sure, and throughout the world. That being said, Bourgogne producing great classic Pinot Noir, the home to Pinot Noir, and the Côte d'Or, Côte de Nuit, villages like Vaune-Romanée, Gevrey-Chambertin, Maurice Saint-Denis, Chambord-Musigny, and Nuit Saint-Georges. These are really high quality Pinot Noir Grand Cru wines. Those are some of the classifications of the Pinot Noir wines in those villages, and they're they are the best of the best, and very expensive. We'll look at each of those, or some of those, next class. Champagne is, by my last check on the numbers, roughly 40% planted to Pinot Noir, and then 30% Pinot Meunier, and 30% Chardonnay. And Germany, just over the French border into Germany, we have Spätburgunder, late. So Spät is late growing. Burgunder, Pinot Noir, essentially. So Spätburgunder is the German word for Pinot Noir, and some very good value and kind of that old world style classic Spätburgunder Pinot Noir. There's Vosne Romanée, Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, DRC, is a monopole, a monopoly, essentially a monopole, a single winery that owns the entire vineyard of Vosne Romanée, which is perhaps the most revered vineyard for Pinot Noir. In Oregon, I put them as the benchmark producer. I'd say they're one of my preferred styles. Okay, our last red grape variety, moving along well, is Syrah. Same grape variety as Shiraz. So if it's produced in the northern Rhone, along the Rhone River in the south of France, it's called Syrah. And in regions that produce it in that food-friendly, a little bit more acidity, a little bit more fresh style, a little bit lighter in alcohol, they can call it Syrah. Whereas Shiraz is the Australian same grape variety, but known as Shiraz when they imported it in the 19th century. And it tends to be fuller, jammy, fruit-forward, and ripe styles there, although there is a wide spectrum within Australia for sure, and other parts as well. So where is Syrah grown? Shiraz grown? In Washington State, as mentioned, Chile, South Africa, producing some high quality Syrah and Shiraz, depending on how they want to name it. The home has to be Australia, the new home for sure, where it's Barossa Valley, McLaren Valley, or McLaren Vale, being the classic high quality producers of Shiraz. But it's grown throughout all of Australia. Other regions include Heathcote, and then within the central kind of plains district, the inland district, where you get some of these high yield, irrigated, very fun wines. Critter wines they were called. With the little penguin on it or kangaroo, and so there are those as well for us to enjoy. In the heartland of France, for Syrah, it's the northern Rhone, and of course Côte Rôtie and Hermitage. So roasted slopes, Côte Rôtie and Hermitage, both south-facing, warm climate Syrah. And just further south, in an even warmer Mediterranean climate, is the southern Rhone, where they blend Syrah with Grenache, as well as some other blending grape varieties. There's Hermitage there for our New World benchmark, Old World benchmark. Hermitage is fantastic wine, pretty much the epitome, along with Côte Rôtie, of Syrah, Shiraz. And Penfolds is a producer in South Australia, and they produce the Grange, which is an iconic Shiraz, top of the top. Okay, so that covers our 8 principal grape varieties. I'll just take a quick sip. Okay, thank you for tuning in so far. We'll just go, lastly, in the last 5 or 8 minutes, we'll cover several grape varieties, about 2 dozen grape varieties, kind of splayed out on maps here for where they principally come from. They can be grown in other parts. And they're grouped by lightly aromatic white grape varieties as well as aromatic white grape varieties, and light to medium red grape varieties, light to medium bodied red grape varieties, and full bodied red grape varieties. So lightly aromatic, I mentioned Semillon, you can see there in Bordeaux on the west coast of France, is a lightly aromatic grape variety, as well as Albarino, being a Spanish. Chenin Blanc in the Loire. We're going to look at Chenin Blanc wines next class after this. And in the northeast of France is Pinot Blanc in Alsace. Have you heard of Alsace? Have you been to Alsace? Have you tasted Alsace wines? So Pinot Blanc is a classic, especially in the Crémant d'Alsace, the sparkling wines. And very lightly aromatic, very almost neutral. In fact, basically neutral is Trebbiano from Italy. So just a bit of an introduction to these grape varieties. In the New World still, we have Argentinian, especially in the north, but all throughout Argentina is planted Torrontés, a very aromatic pink-skinned grape variety. And another pink-skinned grape variety, Gewürztraminer. So there's the one I kind of hooked you at the beginning of the class. So without the umlaut, the two dots on the U, is Gewürztraminer in Alsace. And so that's the French version. And then with the umlaut is still pronounced Gewürztraminer in Germany. And Viognier in the south along southern Rhone, as well as northern Rhone, such as Château-Griet in Condrieu. Muscat is grown throughout the world, but I put it here in northwestern Italy for Muscat d'Asti. So some medium-bodied, medium or full. It depends quite a bit on the climate, but these tend to be towards the medium, especially Cabernet Franc in the Loire and Gamay in Beaujolais. Pinotage in South Africa from Pinot Noir and Cinsault, which they called Hermitage. So Pinotage is medium-bodied but can be full in South Africa. Is a born and bred South African grape variety. A couple of representative grape varieties. Tempranillo is the most planted variety in all of Spain, and has various synonyms. Same as Sangiovese in Italy has many synonyms, and is the most planted red grape variety there. And for full-bodied, we have Nebbiolo in northern Italy in Piemonte. We'll look at that next week, next class. Garnacha is Spanish of origin, and then also known as Grenache in France. So Grenache, grows beautifully in both, especially northern Spain and southern France. Zinfandel used to be thought to be an American grape variety, but they traced its lineage in the 90s, I believe, and they found out it was Croatian, called Trebedrag or Surlianak Kastelanski. You can look up the spelling; it's very, very interesting. A bit of a tongue twister, but it turns to be that was the ancestor of both Zinfandel and what's called a grape variety called Primitivo in southern Italy in Apulia. So I've put Zinfandel there, but it's actually Primitivo, and still called Zinfandel in the United States, where it's grown to great effect as a red grape variety for Lodi. Some really interesting Zinfandel wines. I'm sure you know Carmenere from Chile and Malbec from Argentina. These are fantastic value and very high quality, can be very high quality, world-class grape varieties and wines. Okay, that brings us to the end at about 50 minutes. So thanks so much for tuning in and checking out Constructive Wine Online. I'd like to say cheers to you. Next class, if you stay tuned, we'll look at Italy, France, Spain, Europe, and look forward to covering that region. It's a large amount of knowledge and information to cover, and terms and rivers and mountains and grape varieties and appellations. So looking forward to diving in with you on that there. So cheers to you. Thanks very much.